the Red Sox roster lineup appears to be kind of coming together, and it does seem that the way things are tracking, Rafael Devers is the Red Sox new designated hitter, at least if opening day were today, and Christian Campbell seems to be tracking towards being the second baseman. After all that's gone down this spring, what is your guys' take on where we see the Red Sox positioned positionally with a little over a month to go to the season starting?
It is not the best lineup they could trot out, is my thing. Um, yeah, I saw the look, Dakota. Have you seen the way Yoshida's been hitting? Because the way it's constructed right now, Yoshida doesn't hit at all, and he's probably been their steadiest hitter during the spring. So honestly, the best situation would be Campbell beginning in AAA, Bregman at second, and Devers at third. That doesn't look like it's going to happen. So now you have a weird situation where it's like, well, are you going to try and dump Yoshida's contract for pennies on the dollar when he might actually be a useful bat right now? So I actually think the X factor in all of this is now Yoshida as opposed to Campbell or Bregman or David Hamilton or Devers or anyone like that because they've pretty much eliminated the glove component of Yoshida's game. So
We've eliminated the
he's
glove compartment.
yeah, I mean, he was limited, but left field in Fenway, like he would have been fine enough. I'm not saying he's going to be better than Roman Anthony or Jaron Duran would be there. But in any event, you have essentially pigeonholed this guy to where he can only be your DH. And now with your roster construction, you've pretty much done the same thing with your best offensive player. So there's going to be a logjam somewhere, and I have not seen enough out of Christian Campbell to feel comfortable with him being your everyday second baseman. I mean, the what was it, 0 for 9 with 4 strikeout stretch, something like that. Like I know he hit a bomb in the spring breakout game, but yeah, I don't think that this is necessarily them trotting out the best iteration of this lineup right now.
So, a couple things for me on Yoshida. I think, they already said he's going to start the season on the IL. So because he's clearly not ready to play the field. And I think the problem there is like, yeah, you could pencil him in as the everyday DH, but that makes them lefty heavy. And, it's like you might need somebody else to play DH, and I don't know. I just don't know like if I don't know how Yoshida play like if he's gonna be a relatively close to everyday player, which he's being paid as such, then he needs to play in the field sometimes. And if that happens, then you need to slide someone else into DH. Like I don't know. I just think he's an awkward fit. Um, and he's not. They need him to. If he's going to be on the roster, he needs to play the field at some point. And it sounds like he's not ready to do that because of the shoulder. So I think that's a big part of it. But on Campbell, you know, I agree. Like he has not played his way onto the roster. At the same time, like I'm not gonna, as far as him at the plate, I'm not gonna overreact to a bad spring. He's been better in the second half of spring than he was at the beginning. And I think more than anything, it's about like his approach at the plate. At the beginning he was just swinging at everything and he was clearly pressing and wasn't, having good quality professional at bats. That's absolutely changed over the past few weeks. The results haven't been wildly better, but I think he looks far more comfortable. But for me, like the reason why I'm not sold on this is defensively. I know everyone took their pants off a couple days when he made 3 diving plays, but for the most part, he looks very uncomfortable at second base. Like I think he has all the tools to be a good second baseman, but he only played like 30 games at second in the minors or something like that. Last year when Meyer got hurt, they moved him to short rather than keeping Campbell at second base, and I think they just should have kept him there. And I think it's shown during spring. He doesn't look like ready to go at second base. And I don't think, so for me, I'm like, I wouldn't put him there. I would start with David Hamilton because he's the superior defender. And when Campbell's ready, he'll come up. But I just think he needs more time at second base. And I think the Red Sox need to get off to a fast start. So I don't know if they can afford to have a guy, figuring out at second and potentially being a liability, which I think he could be. But sort of my final thought on this is that I'm not really buying this report yet either. I don't think it's a coincidence that, we get this note from Mass Live about Campbell leading the second base job a day before Cora leaves open the possibility of Marcelo Meyer being the second baseman. Like, I think there's a possibility that this is Cora trying to like see how he can motivate guys, see how guys respond to all right, now Christian, like maybe you're reading the press clippings and you're the second baseman. Do you keep your foot on the gas or do you take a step back? Like it's not past core to sort of test these guys in this way and see what he can get out of them. When at the end of the day he might just go to David Hamilton. So I'm not like I don't think this is over by any stretch. But if it is over, I have questions too because I don't think Campbell is ready to play defensively at second base.
That's interesting.
This is
Yeah, I didn't think about the motivational factor. But I think you guys both raised really good points that by having Campbell at second, you have really neither your strongest defensive lineup or your strongest offensive lineup in place. You know, I mean, they have a bunch of second basemen who can't play second base. Vaughn Grissom is awful. David Hamilton is, he's a 4A player. Christian
Better than
Campbell.
4A. He's a good player.
That's okay. I mean, when I say 4A, I mean a guy who is useful to fill spots. He's not an
high-end bench option.
Yeah, he's not an everyday major leaguer, but he is a guy that plays 2 or 3 times a week in various roles. And then you have Alex Bregman, who I don't even think spent any time at second base after the expectation was he was going to play second base. I'm kind of I agree with both of you, even though I think both of you are kind of on different ends of this. I would prefer to see them either go with the lineup that is maybe shaky defensively, but has the best offensive potential, or not worry about second base being an offensive nothing and have someone who is more solid at second base. But instead, it's just kind of like, okay, well, we're not going to be very strong up the middle defensively, and we're also potentially not going to get anything from this position offensively. I don't see where the benefit is in kind of splitting the baby that way.
Yeah. Sorry, you go, Logan. Here.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, I don't like. I feel like I haven't seen this much anywhere, but like, why not Rafaela at second? Like, you have enough outfielders, and especially if you think like Abreu's not going to be ready on time, Ref Snyder's a perfectly fine replacement.
So you
Sounds
would
like
have
Abreu is going to be ready though. I think that's the answer there. Is
so you would have Duran in center?
No, I think
I'd probably have.
I think
I'd
you're going to
probably
have
have
Durant left, Rafael or center.
No, I'm saying under Logan's thing. If
under
Rafael
my
is at
thing.
second.
Yeah, I'd probably say Duran in center, Ref Snyder in left, and
No, it'd be
Abreu
Roman
in
Anthony.
right.
You're not starting to see if there's an opening in left field. You're not making it Ref Snyder over Roman Anthony, who absolutely is ready. I think that's been.
I mean, I agree with that, but you have to. I mean, if it's Roman Anthony, I'd be perfectly fine with that. But I'm just saying that doesn't. For some reason, I'm skeptical that they're going to, especially if Christian Campbell is going to be their starting second baseman. I don't think. Like, I've kind of arrived at the place where I think they would take one of those guys and enter the year with them, envisioning them as an everyday player. But like, they have enough options at second base. And this is something Ben and I have said before, is like, Campbell's rise was insane. Like, he was this time last year, he was not on the radar like he is now. And so now we're going to try our damnedest to get this guy into the big league roster to be your everyday second baseman when he, to your point, Dakota, has very limited experience there, has already been spotty in Grapefruit League pitching. Like, again, has gotten better. He can obviously torch minor league pitching, but it's like, I just don't see, and David Hamilton is a reliable option, and Rafaela can play there. So to me, it's just like, why are you putting yourself in that position? I would rather, if we're taking one of the young guys right now, I'd rather it be Roman Anthony. And then, yeah, you do Anthony, Duran, and Abreu in the outfield. Or Anthony, Rafaela, and Abreu. But this idea that like they have to get Campbell there, they have no other options at second base. It's just, they were so weird with the media all freaking spring. They're saying guys will try here, but then they don't take reps there, and it's this and that. And so it's like, I don't even know how far I can hitch my wagon to the like chorus just trying to motivate guys. I'm getting to the point now where it's like, it just feels pretty freaking disorganized.
Yeah, I think with Campbell, like if it's about Campbell versus like Yoshida, as you were saying earlier, which I don't think that is what it is for them, but let's just, if we're talking about what's their best lineup, I think at that point, and okay, of course, there's a possibility that Campbell comes up and really struggles, but I think they're clearly really confident in him that that's not going to be the case. That he'll at least be like he'll be solid, and then eventually turn into who they think he can be. And so at that point, it's like, well, Yoshida offers probably better on base and a higher batting average immediately, but Campbell will make up the difference just in pop, more doubles, more home runs. Um, that so then you just kind of which one would you rather have? Plus he balances the lineup. So I in that sense, I get it. It is this is probably super unfair to Christian Campbell, but on the notion of guys who are kind of quieter and maybe got accelerated too fast. Sometimes I think of Jeter Downs when I think of Christian Campbell, and it's not a good comp because Christian Campbell's so much better than Jeter Downs. But
It's a terrifying comp.
well, no, but I say that because in the Red Sox, a lot of people like forget about everything about Jeter Downs in that deal, and he when they Red Sox, he was the prize of that deal.
Intentionally, in some cases, they forget about him.
Yeah. Well, he was the real prize of that trade, and he was supposed to be like a fringe sort of all-star, greater than the sum of his parts shortstop, and he was supposed to be really good, but then he missed a year of development because of COVID, and a lot of different guys reacted to that differently. He sort of torpedoed, Jay Groom torpedoed. Other guys, they were fine. Like Jaron Duran used it to refine his swing and took off. Like it just wasn't a one-size-fits-all approach. But then when they came out of that, they assigned Jeter Downs to AAA when he'd only played a couple of games in AA, and he struggled really bad. And he was terrible. And then it became apparent that this is a guy who was really hard on himself. He didn't handle struggling well. He put a lot of pressure on himself and got nervous. And that was something the Red Sox missed in the evaluation when they traded for him. They looked at the tools and not that he's a bad guy, but how does he handle if he's going to struggle in Boston? And so I just wonder, Christian Campbell, like I don't know what his personality is like, but he seems like a quieter guy. How is he going to handle it if he comes up and struggles mightily with the Red Sox? Like I just think they need to put more thought into something like that because not everybody just rebounds from it. So they have to be sure that he'll be all right. And one final note on David Hamilton, I just pulled up a story from Sean McAdam from last week where he quoted a scout gave him takes on like basically everyone on the roster. And on David Hamilton, he said, on a championship team, he's probably a guy off the bench, but on a team that's maybe in the middle of the pack, yeah, he's an everyday guy. So that's just one scout, right? I'm not saying I agree with him, but I do think David Hamilton might be better than we give him credit for.
So where my head actually just went, just thinking about comps with that is Blake Swihart.
I thought of that too. Yeah.
And it's like, why are we so hell-bent on making sure that this guy makes the opening day roster at a position that he's kind of like, it's not really his primary position. Like he can play it, but it's not his primary position, which that's a departure from like, hey, I know you're a career catcher, Blake Swihart, but go play left field.
Well, that's what I was thinking when they were talking about moving Campbell to left field because the second base was blocked. I'm like, what happened the last time we said, well, you'll figure it out?
Just started cycling guys through left field, thinking that they could figure it out. Yeah. Well, and that's what leads me to the point of like, why does he have to break camp with the big team? Like they have David Hamilton. They could put Rafaela there. A layer on the Yoshida thing too is like, I don't freaking believe that there's an issue with his shoulder. Like have you seen the guy swinging a bat? Like how many guys?
Yeah, but that doesn't mean anything.
I know, like Tommy John surgery, you can have that and still hit and all that stuff. But it's like,
that's all the evidence.
Well, is it? Because after last year, there were clearly medical disagreements. The Red Sox were pissed that he was getting second opinions. He clearly didn't feel right. And so I think that the player and the team could be on totally different pages at this point about the guy's health. So that's why I'm sitting there watching like, well, they got no issues slotting him into the 5-hole and letting him hit nukes. So it's like, but this guy has to end up on the IL. Like it's just this foregone conclusion because of this shoulder issue for a team that has made no bones about the fact that they don't want him in the field. Like there is a world where if Devers has to be your DH, then you can put Yoshida in left field and it's fine. And you can have Rafael at second. You have Yoshida in left, Duran in center, and in such a case, it would be either Abreu or Roman Anthony in right. I don't think there's an issue with that, and I would rather see something like that than force feeding Christian Campbell, who was playing in what, high A year ago. Like, this whole thing just feels like they could end up railroading a lot of guys' careers with poor asset management.
You know, maybe still their best asset though on the big league roster is Devers, and I just feel like this thing has gotten way more messy than it needed to be. The whole supposed benefit of both Cora as the manager and Breslow as the youngish GM coming in was supposed to be communication, or at least one of the benefits. It doesn't feel like at any point there was a clear communication from front office to manager to player about just what was the plan with Bregman here. And if indeed, the plan was always to have him be at third base, there was never an opportunity, at least it seems, for Devers to air those grievances in private prior to that happening, and kind of mission controlling that before it got to camp. If that wasn't always the plan, where is Bregman in all this? Like, did he come in? What position was he anticipating he would be playing when he signed that contract? Where was Cora? And in talking to Breslow, expected to have Bregman and Devers, who are arguably their two best players right now. It just seems like there were multiple conversations that were missed before we just went out and signed Alex Bregman and celebrated maybe the most major offensive everyday free agent signing that they've had in recent years.
Yeah, and I mean, I think since the last episode, that report from Sean McAdam has come out that Devers considered requesting a trade recently in a private meeting with the Red Sox, and I just pulled it up, and this was an excerpt from it. It said, behind closed doors, Devers let the Red Sox know in no uncertain terms that he's still feeling aggrieved and disrespected. Meanwhile, to the public, he is the dutiful employee doing what he's told to do. And he also just said that Devers thought that the Red Sox were dishonest with him or not fully transparent about their plans to pursue Bregman or Arenado during the offseason. So, I mean, that to your point, I mean, clearly they didn't do this the right way, or they didn't think it through. And so you can't feel good about that.
Well, they were saying all offseason, like, Devers is our third baseman. You'd even, like, clearly someone was leaking that too, because you'd hear it in reports too that, like,
Cora said
they're
it.
public.
Cora
Yeah,
said it.
they're.
So
I know, and it's like, we're talking about an interesting dynamic here too, because like Cora and Bregman were tight in Houston. Like, that's been a very well documented component of this. And one of the other things is like Cora and Devers since the beginning have been very tight, and there's been that role there. So now it's like you have two guys that are like, the bigger dogs on the team. Both of them have very similar relationships with Cora that happened at different times. And so it's just a weird dynamic, but I'd be pissed too, like, if I were Devers, because he did get misled in a way. And like, it's a separate discussion whether you think he is responding appropriately or not. But like, I really don't think that is like him requesting a trade. I kind of understand that. And that goes back to the point I've had for a while, which is like, you should want this guy to be wanting to play third base. You hear so much stuff. I mean, the last freaking third baseman that they signed to a massive deal was Pablo Sandoval. And the second the ink went dry, he stopped giving a shit. And so it's like, with Devers, it at least seems like there's an organic drive to actually play this role. And to me, it's like there was a way to make this work in a way that defensively and offensively works, and that's putting Bregman at second. And it seems like, despite leaving the door open for that for so long, they never even so much as tried to do it. And so I think Devers would have every right to be aggrieved by it. Now, he got paid, so he probably should just, deal with it and show up, and it sounds like that's what he's going to do. But like, I'm not put off at all with the fact that he's pissed. I probably would be too.
But my thing is, like, what's the logical endpoint in this? And it's that, so what? Like, Bregman plays third this year. Let's say he has a good season and he opts out, which probably is what the Red Sox want, right? Like they're saying all the stuff about Alex Bregman, but I bet they would like him to crush it this year and opt out. And then what? Like you're going to move Rafael Devers back to third base after a year not playing it? It's like how is that going to how would that help him eventually become reliable at third base? And so like it feels like this is permanent. Like this is it. Unless he goes to first, right? Unless they trade Tristan Cassis and Devers becomes a first baseman, which maybe that is the ultimate outcome. But if it's permanent DH, are you paying 313 million over 10 years for a DH? Like I don't see it. I can't imagine they think that's good. That's good business. And so I mean, I'm starting to come around to the idea that like a trade feels like, unless he goes to first, a trade feels like the most logical outcome. And I think there are a lot of teams that would put him as their third baseman, that they'd be fine with that if the rest of their infield defense is fine. Um, yeah, I don't know which teams off the top of my head, but I think there are a lot of teams that would be just fine with him as their third baseman. And so I just wonder if this does go the way of a trade, because you don't pay a DH that much money.
I mean, they're completely obliterating its value then by not letting him play third at all.
That too.
Because it's like, all right, so you're going to trade him to a team because you don't want to pay $30 million a year for your DH. Like that's perfectly plausible. What team's going to want to do that? And so, and another interesting dynamic in this is, talking about the relationships component of thing. There were so many talks about the Bogaerts and Devers dynamic. I mean, Bogaerts for years is like, I'm not moving offshore, and he's in San Diego now playing second base with a smile on his face. And it's because Hassan Kim was a better option up until
he's also in his 30s at that point. So like, I think he knew he was a liability at short.
He knew it was come. Yes, but he fought that tooth and nail for a while. Like the timeline moved up for Devers, but it's just like, yeah, I have a hard time believing that they're just gonna be like, all right, Bregman opted out. Like Devers is our third baseman again. Like it's almost like they're gonna have to treat this as a platoon situation.
One quick note that I was just thinking about this on Bogaerts is, just remembering how everybody, the crying over when Xander Bogaerts signed elsewhere, and like what I thought were bogus reports about how Chaim Bloom was just almost in tears when Bogaerts signed. Like, no way. They never wanted to sign him. And so first, obviously they got Christian Campbell with that comp pick. So that's huge win, Red Sox. Like, who would you rather have, Bogaerts or Campbell? Campbell, and it's not a discussion, but going into the season, truthfully, if you could pick one of the two players, who would you rather have, Xander Bogaerts or Trevor Story? I mean, I think it's at least close. And
you at least fix your second base issue, because Story's playing second in that situation, probably.
I think right now he's a better defensive shortstop than Bogaerts, and I don't even think Story is that good at short because of his arm. But just in general, I mean, Bogaerts is declining rapidly. Where I don't think it's at all outside of the realm of possibility that Trevor Story is the better defender and hitter this year than Xander Bogaerts. When a few years ago there was just outrage that they seemingly charted a course where Story would be Bogaerts' eventual replacement, and now it looks like it doesn't look like they were right. Like, I think clearly.
So. Yeah, I mean that's kind of water under the bridge at this point, right? I mean, Bogaerts is gone; he's not a concern of theirs anymore. Devers, though, is still here, as is Trevor Story. So I do think that keeping Devers happy, or if you're planning on keeping him, is something that is important to do. Trading Devers would be a tough look a couple years after they've essentially were forced to sign him because they let Mookie go, they let Bogaerts go, and they were facing a fan uprising if they had also lost Devers. I just look at it. It's not impossible to bring in a player, a star player, an all-star caliber player, in the same position of your best player, and for it to work. Like, that's not totally impossible. Because one comparison that I draw, and they're two very different players, obviously. But Bryce Harper, who again he's developed into maybe the ideal teammate in all of baseball. He was in Philly, came over from Washington as an outfielder. They acquired Castellanos to play right. then
And they had Schwarber.
well, they got Schwarber later. So Harper outfielder, predominantly a right fielder. The Phillies, I'm guessing Dombrowski communicating with Harper that, hey, we're getting an outfielder. He's gonna make us a better team. We're gonna have you, through a combination of fitness and health, gonna become our designated hitter. Then we get Schwarber, right? Schwarber can't really play the field, so he's gonna become our designated hitter. We're not gonna retain Rhys Hoskins. That's gonna make us a worse team. But now Harper, we're gonna move you to first base. He's going to put in the work to become a first baseman. So it's just like, it does, like, it is possible. And I don't think it is a coincidence that you have an older school executive in Dave Dombrowski, where it's all about relationships and makeup and understanding the psychology of human baseball players, and a best player who is open to those conversations and flexible and willing to do what needs to be done to make a team be the best that it can be, versus Breslow, who, I'm not saying he's not a personable person, but the whole selling point, right, is that he's comes from an Ivy League background. He knows he's the new age guy. I don't know that he necessarily has those communication skills the way that an older school guy does. With Devers, which I don't know about, how receptive he is to those conversations compared to Harper, but it just doesn't seem like that sort of back and forth happened in a way that generated a positive environment in that clubhouse, the way that it's been shown that it can happen if you do it, if you go about it the right way.
Yeah, I wonder, I'm trying to remember back to if A-Rod, I'm sure the Yankees told A-Rod before they traded for him that he...
That's where my head went to, was A-Rod and Jeter. But, I feel like we might be backing ourselves into the take that this is a broad problem from Craig Breslow, because if you go back to last offseason, the messaging was so all over the place, from ownership down to him. And I think Tom Warner doing the full throttle thing backed Breslow into a corner where it was like, I don't think his idea of full throttle is going to be the same as Warner's. And then he has to explain this away. But every offseason, it seems like there's this ambiguity about what their direction is or where they see some of these players going. And we talk about trading Devers. I wouldn't do that unless you rework Bregman's contract. Because what happens if you trade a pissed off Devers this year and then Bregman opts out and goes somewhere else?
Meyer at third.
Meyer, yeah.
Or Campbell.
You mean the perpetually hurt Meyer, or Campbell, who we just said we don't really know what position he actually plays. Again, that's you could very quickly wander yourself into a hole where you're in a bad spot. The purpose of them at signing Bregman was because they finally had all the core pieces ready. The guys, Devers, he's ready to go. Duran, he's a star, he's ready to go. The prospects, they've got those guys to fill in the gaps, but they're supposed to take them to another level. This offseason was supposed to be adding the veterans on the margins to help things out. Walker Buehler, Chapman, and then obviously Bregman. And so what really are you accomplishing? Trading Devers is setting yourself back unless you get an absolute haul, but you wouldn't be trading him at peak value because everyone knows he's pissed right now. And if you're really going to corner him into being a DH, then who's going to be, again, paying 35 million a year for a DH? No smart team would do that.
I think it's going to be just a fascinating storyline next offseason. And maybe and usually these things sort themselves out, but I wonder, next offseason, it's do they entertain trading Devers? Unless if they don't sign Vladimir Guerrero Jr., right? I don't know if you can get rid of your franchise slugger without already having another one lined up, and maybe that's Vlad Guerrero. Or by that time, is it clear that Roman Anthony is your franchise slugger? That could very well be the case, right? Or does Tristan Cassis finally have the season everyone thinks he's capable of? And then you look at it and you're like, we don't need Devers as much as we did a year ago. We have other guys who have emerged as those middle of the order threats. Would Vlad Jr. even come here if Devers isn't here? Is that a part of what makes Boston intriguing to him, is playing with Devers if they're friends? So I just think there could be a lot of layers to it next offseason, including, to your point, Logan, does Devers sneak in at first base a little bit this year to kind of keep his value up? So I just don't. I mean, this storyline might like quiet throughout the year because winning solves everything. But then check back in the offseason and see where we're at, because I think this will be a real storyline to watch.
That's not even getting into either the fact that being a DH is like a very difficult thing to do. Like JD
Yeah, we talked
Martinez
about it,
was
right?
very
Some
good.
guys do it, some guys can't do it. Like,
Yeah, and I mean, you're talking about a player who's already pissed and ambivalent about the idea of doing this. And it's like, I feel like they've had a tough time getting Devers to stay engaged when he's playing at third base, too. I mean, to tell you when that guy's only doing something once every 85 minutes that he's gonna, keep up with the offensive production he has, like, this is a precarious thing, just putting him at DH.